Hi, everyone who has joined us. We're just holding for a minute to make sure everybody can join the webinar. So hold tight and we will get going momentarily. For those of you who have just joined us, we're just waiting a minute. We still have a minute before noon, and so we're just waiting another minute to get going so everybody has a chance to log into the webinar. So hold tight and we will be starting momentarily. Hi, everyone. It is 12 noon. We're just going to wait another probably 30 seconds, 30 to 60 seconds for everybody to be able to log on. I can see people just jumping in coming in. And so we're excited to have all of you here for this webinar. Just want to give everyone a chance to log in before we get going. So hang tight for about one more minute. Okay, I think we're going to get started. It's one after, and I know we'll keep having people come in, but welcome to our webinar. I'm going to ask Joel to share his screen so that we can get started here with a little bit of housekeeping. There we go. There we go. So this is our webinar. Thank you all for attending. I can see people are still coming in. And as I do a little bit of this housekeeping, hopefully we will fill our ranks here. Thank you so much for coming. We're excited. We're excited to have our CEO, Joel Dehlin, here. I'm going to turn the time over to him momentarily. This is our no code versus low code webinar, driving valuable process change with no code tools. Joel, if you could move that to my housekeeping slide, that would be fantastic. So the session is being recorded and all of you participants will receive a link to that should you want to review it later. All attendees are automatically on mute because it's a webinar, of course. Chat is disabled. However, we do want to field your questions. So if you will put your questions in that Q&A dialogue, then we will, after Joel's presentation, we will get to all of those questions. We'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. We're excited to have this. And that is all of my introduction. I am just going to turn the mic over to Joel Dehlin and let him introduce himself and our topic.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Kuali is about amazing software for higher education with a great community. I'm going to do a couple of slides to introduce the company, and then we'll get right into it. Kuali was formed because there was a problem in higher ed, inefficient systems with difficult to work with vendors. So in 2004, some universities got together to build their own software, had great success doing that, and about 10 years later, decided to invest in a company to create a company to modernize our software development practices, our customer service practices, marketing, development, design, and so forth. And since then, we've been a company focused on great user experience, modern software, and a fantastic, robust community. We have over 200 schools now that are using our software. And we have a variety of different product lines. I'm not going to go into these, but we have a variety of different products that we offer to higher ed. What we're here to talk about is code. So you've all seen problems with code or you wouldn't be here. I want to talk to you for a minute about Pat. Pat is somebody in higher ed, some functional manager or director, or provost or anyone in higher ed who needs to get something done. And they're facing pressure, enrollment numbers, international students, curricular changes, IT capacity, a whole bunch of different issues that Pat is trying to deal with. And yet Pat is being asked to adapt and create change quickly, at low cost, and high quality. So there are a variety of ways that Pat will try to do this. Pat could use paper processes to do that. Pat could use forms, something like Adobe PDF forms or some other forms package. Pat could go to IT or hire Pat's own software developers to do custom development, or Pat could go off the shelf and purchase a product. So what ends up happening is on your campus, you have a mix of paper processes, custom forms, off-the-shelf solutions, and custom code projects. So Jaime is an IT, and Jaime is trying to deal with all of this stuff that is coming at Jaime. So for paper and forms, Jaime is dealing with data governance issues and security issues, because really paper is very similar to forms in that it's not centralized. Data is just out there. The user experience is not great. Students often have to print off the PDF, write in the information, take a picture, and upload the file. It's just not a great experience overall. There's off-the-shelf solutions that Jaime is trying to deal with, and there's a place for that. There's quite a lot of expense. Often there's a lack of innovation. Once you buy this off-the-shelf solution, there isn't a lot of innovation often that goes into it over time. And you've got this vendor roulette problem where the vendor might be great, but the vendor might be terrible. Or they might be great and they get purchased by a private equity firm or some other company and they end up becoming terrible over time. So definitely a place for off-the-shelf, but it's not a panacea. And then you've got code. So often what happens is that institutions try to code their way out of problems. And Pat is stuck in the middle, and Jaime in IT is also stuck in the middle at kind of the mercy of the software development team that is trying to get this code written. This is a picture of me back when I was in the 90s at Microsoft, and I was a software developer, and if I had an opportunity to write some code or manage a team that was writing code, I would do that because I love to write code, even though it wasn't always the best solution. So you're hiring people like me into your institution in order to write code. But there are some issues with that, and I want to talk about some of those issues today. The first is it's difficult to find really great developers. There's quite a lot of competition for the really great developers. Often they want to go to some Silicon Valley startup, or they want to work at Amazon or Microsoft or Facebook or someplace like that. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes we've found there to be really, really great developers in higher ed, but that's not always the case. And those great developers are in demand. So in higher ed, if you're a functional person and you want a software development project, it's difficult for you to compete for the resources because IT is either maybe they're going through a big SIS implementation, or they're creating some set of integrations, or they're doing some very important, very strategic project. And you just want a very simple form or a very simple app. So it's difficult sometimes to compete with the priority of all these other things in your institution that your institution wants your software developers for. There's also an issue with developers, and I am guilty of this myself. There's a flavor of the day of what technology you want to use. You want your career to progress as a software developer, so you want to use the latest and the greatest technology. So sometimes I compare it to, are you the kind of developer that enjoys the ride or the destination? If you enjoy the ride, maybe you care more about what specific tool set you're using. Whereas if you care about the destination, you care more about delivering something for your customers. And there are a lot of developers who care more about the ride. And that makes it more difficult. There's a new framework out. There's a new infrastructure tool set that you can use. There's a new library, a new client library, whatever. So you're faced with that issue of changing technologies that you need to keep up on because that's what your developers want. And sometimes that's totally legitimate. You also have to deal with the fact that if you're writing something, a custom coding project, it takes more time. So you got to get everything set up. You got to get your infrastructure set up. You got to get trained. You've got to figure out what all of the libraries you're going to use. And then you have to figure out what your strategy is for mobile accessibility, for all these different things. You have to plan things out. You've got to figure out what design patterns you're going to use, all this stuff. It just takes time. And then you've got to deal with the bugs. Bugs are just a part of life in software development. Bugs happen, and then you have to figure out how to deal with those bugs. And what often happens is the pressure is substantial to get done with the project. And so we leave technical debt sometimes in our wake, and we don't fix that technical debt. And it causes problems down the road. The way I liken it internally, when I talk to my team, we have a 0 bug policy. So if there are any bugs in our build product, we take care of those bugs immediately. At any one time, we have less than 10 known bugs. And that's because we're always taking care of them. You don't always have the ability to be able to do that. You also have a workforce and a set of students and faculty that are increasingly more mobile. So you've got to figure out how to make sure that when you're writing code, you're doing it in a mobile way. You also need to deal with accessibility. And these are things that are not natural. Not all developers think in that way. How do I make things both mobile? How do I make them responsive? So they work on a mobile device, but they also work on a big screen. How do I make everything accessible? These are things that take a lot of training, a lot of focus, and a lot of intention to make sure that you do a good job with. And then you have to maintain the software. So when software is written by these guys, now you've got to figure out they're not here anymore. So how do I maintain this code? How do I change it over time? They're on to the next project. And now we've got to figure out, how do I make sure that I just want a small change or whatever, but they're on a new project. And now I've got to figure out how to get that taken care of. It's difficult without having what's called cranes on site. You bring a big crane in for a project, you pay all the money to bring in a big crane. Well, while the crane's there, you're going to find a lot of stuff to do with the crane. So unless you dedicate developers to something and they just are there ready to work on stuff, they're going to be on to the next project. And now, if you want to make a change, you've got to either find who those developers are, or somebody has to get up to speed on the code. And then security. Software development can be very secure, but it can also very easily be unsecure. It's very easy to write code in a way that exposes your data in a way that you don't want to have it exposed. And that comes with the ability to write code. Okay, so you've got all these sort of challenges with software development, and software development absolutely has its place. But there are quite a few challenges with software development. I would argue that you need to use the right tool. So sometimes you are going to use paper-based forms. Sometimes you are going to do software development. Sometimes you're going to use an off-the-shelf application, and sometimes sometimes you're going to use a low-code solution. The problem is when you look at low-code and no-code, this is what low-code looks like. So these are actual screens from some of the folks that are offering low-code solutions. And I'm not showing you these screens to denigrate. I'm just showing you these screens to let you know that low-code solutions still have code. You are still writing code, whether it be to change your form around, or to work on your workflow, or to add a button to something, or to create notifications in email. These are all solutions that are competing in the low-code space. And you'll notice there's code. And so that's sort of the dirty secret. The secret with low code is that low code is still code. So if you have the ability to write code, you will. And so a no code solution prevents you from doing that. So I would argue that if you can do what you need to do, which in 90% of the cases where you need a simple form or simple even a complicated form, but you just need forms and workflows and notifications, you can use a no-code tool for that. You don't need to use low-code. And there will be some rare circumstances where you need low-code. And in those cases, you might use it, but everything else should be with a no-code tool. And that's what Kuali Build is. Kuali Build is a no-code forms and workflow tool. So it's kind of in the middle. It's got the ease of use and of the sort of paper processes and forms, but it's got the power of custom development and off-the-shelf applications, but it's done in a secure way. So you can keep IT happy that you're doing things in a safe, managed way, but it allows functional users to create their own forms and workflows. You empower departments to create their own forms and workflows, but you do it in a way that enables IT to feel confident about security and about support. So here's some examples. These are some examples of forms or apps that you could create with a no-code solution. Just a simple audit a course request or a citizenship status, a dual degree application, concurrent degree, traveling scholar, no cost extension request, pre-award expenditure request, a COI management plan, animal usage report. And you can imagine tons of things. Just go to your website and Google your institution and Google Forms. And you're going to see all the forms that your students or faculty have to download, print, or figure out how to do PDF online. But usually it's download, print, fill out, take a picture, send back in. All of those things, 99% of them, can be done with a no-code tool like Kuali Build. So here's just a couple of our customers. Davidson College and UC San Diego, very different. Davidson College is a private, small college that has done a lot of digital transformation using Kuali Build. And you can read the quote for yourself. UC San Diego, Vince is the CIO of UC San Diego. They've got over 700 apps that have been created by functional users who don't have to call on IT to provide software developers to them. They have the ability to just build these applications by themselves using drag and drop. So let me show you what it looks like. So this is Kuali Build. So Kuali Build, each of these icons represents an app. You can choose the color and the icon and so forth. And that app represents a form and a workflow together. And this is something that either a designer could come to this screen or a user could come to this screen. You'll see this what's new. So you see what capabilities are now available to a form designer so they can add them to their form. There's also an action list so that you know what approvals you have that are waiting for you. I'll talk more about that in a minute. As well as my documents list. So you can see what documents you filled out yourself that are waiting to be approved. So the aim of a no-code tool like Build is to create forms. So these forms can be very, very rich with columns and rows, with a variety of different gadgets like drop downs, text boxes, and so forth, with multi-paging. So you can have multiple forms that have different information on them. You can also have things like tables, and these tables can be very complicated with different types of gadgets within the cells of the table, whether it be file uploads, images, date, time, email, so forth. Those can all be in the table. You also have the ability to do calculations. So you can set up calculations between the different fields in the form so that you can calculate information on the fly so the person filling out the form has additional information that is there for the approvers. Once somebody is done with this form, they could submit it, and then approvers will see this form and they can approve or reject or send back. So this is the form design tool. So with the form design tool, you just get a list of gadgets on the left, and you can drag and drop those gadgets over here and create very, very sophisticated forms. These forms have the ability to have, for example, linked fields. The linked field will pull data out of a system that you've given it access to. So the form designer has to have access to the enterprise data and the APIs in order to pull data into this form. But once they do, you can link these fields. So when I drop a requested program field onto this form, there are a number of linked fields. So if somebody types in a program when they're filling out the form, you can drag these fields onto the form as well, so that you can see the program code and the program description, the program title, the program status, and the user doesn't have to type it in again. They just select the form and all of this data shows up. The form designer didn't have to do any coding, and the user of the form didn't have to retype in the data. You also have the ability to do very, very complicated progressive disclosure or conditional formatting. So I can make different parts of the form disappear or appear or change based on what people type into the form. So as a form designer, I clicked on this field, and over here I said, I want to limit the visibility of this field to only show it to administrators. But you could limit visibility of the field or put data into fields in the form based on lots of different parameters. This is our workflow. It's also drag and drop. And drag and drop is very, very important for workflow. And the reason is because you can create very, very complicated nodes that you want to be able to move in the workflow. And the only way to move those without writing some kind of XML or JSON is to drag and drop them. So these are some examples of the types of steps that we have in our workflows. Approvals. Tasks means they need to go do something manually and come back and click a button. An acknowledgement lets somebody know that something is moving for a workflow, but doesn't expect them to do anything about it. A notification is just an email. A branch allows you to create logic without writing code that says, if this happens, do this thing. If this happens, do something else. And then I can use a group hierarchy that you can define in Build in order to route things. So this program gets routed to this committee. A different program gets routed to a different committee. You don't have to do that each time. It's just all configured into the hierarchy structure so that when somebody fills out a form, it automatically gets routed to the right place. You also have the ability to create notifications, and you'll see these notifications are super, super simple. You can have variables. So you're not writing code, you're just using variables from the form. Dear student name, your request to change to the requested program has been approved. Please contact student name advisor if you have any questions. It allows you to create notifications that are easy to parse and valuable so that you don't get a bunch of notifications that you just want to delete because there's no good information in the notifications. This is an example of an email you might get. When you're ready to review, you get that email, you click on the email on that button, and it brings up the form. If you don't want them to click on buttons and emails, we have an action list in Build that you can go to see everything that you're expected to work with. This is an example of a document list. So you're going to have a lot of documents. When people go into your application, they're going to fill out a lot of information. And that information, you want to be able to search on it. So the reporting capability is very robust. You have the ability to create searches and save them. And in the search, you can just determine which columns you want to show up. And those are any fields on the form, plus intrinsic fields that are not on the form, but they tell you things like what is the total workflow runtime, or what is the current workflow status, or the time on the current step, and where is this approval in the process? What step of the workflow is it in? So those columns, you can rearrange those columns, change them, group, filter, and sort based on a variety of different variables, all that are on the form. And of course, all of that information is exportable. Finally, I want to show you some of our enterprise capabilities. So our enterprise capabilities allow you to empower departments to do a variety of different things. So in this university, they've got a variety of different colleges, and they've given each of these colleges what's called a space. And this college space has given the departments within the college, pardon me, their own spaces. So in this case, the College of Humanities has a space, and it can determine its own branding for the forms. If that's what you want to do, you can empower them or not. You also have the ability to have space administration. So you have the administrators of the space that can determine who are the users in my space. What are the applications in my space? What are the integrations that we've created in our space that the form designers have access to? So if we create an integration, for example, a list of current humanities internships, we create that with a dialog box. There's no code. There's just a RESTful API. It's somewhere in my enterprise. I link to it through a dialog box, and I give rights to the form designers to be able to use that integration. Once you do that, they can take the integration, they can drag and drop it onto the form. They can drag and drop it onto the form, and then when people log into the form, it automatically pulls that data and puts it onto the form for the user to use. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing, and we have quite a few people on the webinar, so I'm just going to ask for questions. So Liz, if there are any questions, why don't you tell them to me, and I can talk to them.
Yeah. Yeah, we have some questions, and thank you, Jill. That was fantastic. From Jenny, we have, how do you read and write from external systems without writing code?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we talk to RESTful services. So RESTful service that returns JSON, which is sort of the modern way to do APIs. You just need to bring up the documentation and create an integration. So I'm going to take you into, let me share my screen again, and I'm going to take you in and show you how you create an integration. Okay, let me share my screen again. I shouldn't have turned off. So here's an example of an integration. So in this space, I'm going to create an integration. I'm just going to go to one that already exists. So I'm going to edit this integration. I would go to the API documentation for that API. So if you're using, let's say your student information system is Workday or Banner, or you're using whatever solution, they have RESTful services, which almost all modern SaaS companies or SaaS products have. You would go in and create an integration name, and then you would just choose the type of integration. Are you getting a list? Are you getting a single data item? Or is this going to be used in a workflow? Then you just pick the HTTP method, which is in the documentation. You just pick. You give it a URL, which is should be in your documentation, and then you choose an authentication type. And then you've defined the different outputs. Let me find a different one that has some outputs. You just define the different outputs: code, title, number, subject code, zip code, description, and course outcomes. Now you can use all of those fields on your form or in your workflow, and you can even run tests. So I'm going to run a test for this. So I'm testing the API. I didn't type in the right thing. Let's type in math. I'm doing this on the fly, so we may not have an API set up for this, but that gives you an idea of how you do it. It's quite simple to be able to create integrations to be able to be used on forms or workflows. Thanks for the question.
Okay, thanks, Joel. So we have another question from Victor, and it's very similar. How do you control permission and access to data sources, reading and writing from external systems?
Yeah, that's a great question. So two ways that you can do that. One way that you can do it is when the form is accessing that little dialog box I just showed you, when the form is accessing that API, that integration has to have authenticated access. So it could be a password, it could be a token, it could be a variety of different ways. So you have to have access at the API level, which you would type into that dialog box. Then, once you've created that integration, you have the ability to share that integration. So I can click on the integration itself, and I can determine who I want to share that with. I can share it with a space, I can share it with a set of form designers, I can share it with a group. So I can give form designers the ability to access that API. And then that API will show information based on who's logged in. So if I'm logged in, it might show my advisor. Whereas if Liz is logged in, it might show Liz's advisor. The only reason I can get access to that is because the form designer had access to add that API to the form in the first place.
Hey, thank you. That was a great answer.
Liz, anytime I misspeak.
No, you did fantastic. I will. I'll correct you if you do. So this is from Carl, and Carl says, when would you then recommend a low-code solution?
Yeah, good. It's a good question. The time I would recommend a low-code solution is if you want to create a very sophisticated product. You want, a form pops up, and when the form pops up, it goes to another form. And when that happens, maybe another one comes up, where you have a bunch of different forms that are all reliant on each other and all working in concert. If you want a set of individual forms, and those forms, you want those to be very, very complicated, that's a no-code solution. So no-code is, I want individual products where I need forms and workflows. A low-code solution is, I want to construct my own product where forms bring up other forms and in an orchestrated, complicated way. And I think that the number of times you would want to do that are actually pretty rare.
Well, it kind of leads to the next question. I hadn't read the next question before I asked you the previous question, but this is from Cheryl. Can you combine forms or share data between forms?
Yes, you can. So you have the ability, I'm not going to show it to you, but you have the ability when you're within a form. Oh, sure, I'll show you. Just a second, let me share my screen again. Okay, so let's say that I'm in a form. So I'm in a form and I want to get access to a different app or a different form that I've created within Build. I would click on this gadget. So let me just show you. If you want to drag and drop, you have the ability to drag and drop gadgets. I'm going to drag and drop this here. I'm going to drag and drop this here. I'm going to create this really kind of complicated structure. That's really easy for you to do. If you want to delete it, you just go here and delete. That just shows you a little bit of the power. You should get a full demo to really see the power of this, but you'll see the drag and drop is super easy to use. Once you've drag and dropped an advanced gadget here, you have the ability to come over here and choose a data source. So this is what we did. We created a data source. We created a Build app called Curriculum Management Subject Codes, and then we linked this field to it. So now, effectively, we have one app that is referring to another app. And you could put that data into a dropdown. You could put it into a type ahead. You could put it into a variety of different gadgets, which pull data from other apps that you've created. So that's the way that you would link one form to another form. Did I answer the question?
You did. Thank you so much. And in fact, Joel, we are at time. So I've been watching the Q&A, waiting to see if there's any last minute questions. If anybody has just that last minute question, they were waiting to see what we would answer so far, throw it in there really quickly. We will be wrapping up this webinar. I don't see any more coming in. I think we are at time. Thank you so much, Joel. And thank you to all of our participants for joining us today and listening to no code versus low code, and especially letting us show off and highlight Kuali Build. We're really excited about Kuali Build and how that can help your institutions. Thank you so much, Joel, and everyone attending, and we will see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.